January 1945. The Ardennes forest, Belgium. Snow falls in silence over the blackened pines. The earth is frozen, hard as iron beneath the boots of men who have marched too far, fought too long, seen too much. In a clearing where artillery has stripped the landscape bare, a German Sd.Kfz 251 half-track sits abandoned, its tracks buried in mud that has turned to stone. The engine is cold. There is no fuel. There has been no fuel for 3 days. Nearby American soldiers move past it without pause, riding in olive-drab trucks that seem endless in number. Chevrolets, GMCs, Studebakers, vehicles that came across an ocean and now flow like a mechanical river through the torn heart of Europe. The Germans who once crewed that half-track are gone now, scattered into captivity or death, and the machine they trusted sits as a monument to a mathematics they never fully understood. Not the mathematics of engineering brilliance or tactical doctrine, but the cold, merciless arithmetic of industrial production. This is not a story about one battle or one weapon. This is the story of two philosophies of war, two visions of how nations mobilize their strength, and how the distance between 5,000 and 300,000 became the distance between victory and annihilation. When Adolf Hitler stood before his generals in the spring of 1940, flush with impossible triumph over France, he believed he had discovered the future of warfare. Blitzkrieg, lightning war, had shattered the armies of Poland in weeks, carved through the Low Countries like a blade through paper, and humbled the French and British forces in a campaign that rewrote every assumption about modern combat. At the heart of this revolution was mobility, tanks, mechanized infantry, and the vehicles that carried men and weapons faster than any army in history. Among these machines, the half-track held a place of particular pride. The Sd.Kfz 251 was a masterpiece of German engineering. It combined the cross-country capability of a tracked vehicle with the speed and efficiency of wheeled transport. Its armor could deflect small arms fire. Its design allowed it to carry a squad of Panzer Grenadiers directly into combat, keeping pace with the Panzer divisions as they tore through enemy lines. German engineers poured thousands of hours into perfecting its design, the angle of the armor plates, the efficiency of the suspension, the reliability of the Maybach engine. Every rivet, every weld, every component was crafted with precision. It was, by any measure, an excellent vehicle. Between 1939 and 1945, German industry produced approximately 15,000 half-tracks of all types. Of these, roughly 5,000 were the Sd.Kfz 251, the workhorse of the mechanized infantry. This was not a small number. It represented countless tons of steel, aluminum, rubber, and fuel. It required entire factories, skilled labor, and a supply chain that stretched across occupied Europe. The German High Command considered these vehicles essential, so essential that production continued even as Allied bombs reduced German cities to rubble and Soviet armies closed in from east. But in the vastness of the Eastern Front, in the deserts of North Africa, in the mountains of Italy, and the hedgerows of Normandy, 5,000 vehicles were never enough. They were never close to enough. Across the Atlantic, in a nation that had only recently emerged from a shadow of economic depression, a different kind of mobilization was taking shape. The United States had no half-tracks to speak of in 1940. It had no panzer divisions, no mechanized corps that could rival the Wehrmacht. What it had was something the Axis powers fatally underestimated: industrial capacity beyond imagination and a system of mass production refined by decades of civilian manufacturing. Henry Ford had revolutionized the automobile industry with the assembly line. By the 1920s, American factories were producing cars by the millions, vehicles designed not for a military elite but for ordinary people. Trucks carried goods across a continent connected by roads and highways that Germany, with its railroads and autobahns, could not match in flexibility. When war came, the United States did not attempt to reinvent the wheel. It simply repurposed what it already did better than anyone else in the world. It built trucks. Not 5,000, not 50,000. Between 1940 and 1945, American factories produced over 2.5 million military trucks. Of these, approximately 300,000 were delivered to frontline combat units in Europe and the Pacific through direct allocation, while hundreds of thousands more were sent to Allied nations through Lend-Lease. The Soviet Union alone received more than 400,000 American trucks, Studebakers, Dodges, GMCs, vehicles that became the logistical backbone of the Red Army's advance from Stalingrad to Berlin. The numbers are staggering, almost abstract. But numbers are not abstractions when you are a soldier in the field, when the difference between a truck that arrives and a truck that does not is the difference between ammunition and empty rifles, between rations and starvation, between wounded men evacuated and wounded men left to die. June 1944. Normandy, France. The hedgerows are older than memory, thick and tangled, each field a fortress of earth and root. German soldiers dig in, setting machine guns in positions that command every approach. They have been taught that the advantage belongs to the defender, that the Allies will exhaust themselves against prepared positions, that superior German training and tactics will prevail. Some of them have fought in Russia and know what it means to face an enemy with overwhelming numbers. But this is different. This is not the steppes where space itself becomes a weapon. This is close country, where every yard must be won with blood. The Americans come not in a single wave, but in a tide that does not stop. Trucks roll forward day and night. Trucks carrying infantry, trucks carrying artillery shells, trucks carrying fuel, trucks carrying food, trucks carrying bridging equipment, trucks carrying medical supplies, trucks carrying the wounded back and fresh troops forward. The roads behind the Allied lines become arteries of supply that pulse with a rhythm the Germans cannot disrupt. Allied air superiority keeps the Luftwaffe grounded, but even without that, the scale of American logistics would be paralyzing to German commanders raised on the doctrine of mobility and maneuver. A captured German officer, interrogated in July 1944, said, "We were told that the Americans were soft, that they relied on machines because they lacked the fighting spirit of the German soldier. But it is not softness to have so much that you can afford to waste it. We conserve our ammunition because we have no choice. They fire it as if it costs nothing, because to them, it does not. Every day, your trucks bring more. Every day, we have less." This was the reality that German tactical brilliance could not overcome. A single Sd.Kfz 251 half-track might be superior in design to a GMC truck. It was faster cross-country, better armored, more versatile in combat. But when one half-track faced 10 trucks, when 10 half-tracks faced 100 trucks, when an entire German mechanized reserve faced a logistics network that could deliver fuel to Normandy faster than the Wehrmacht could move it from the Ruhr to the front, the question of quality became irrelevant. The German obsession with engineering excellence was not a flaw, it was a philosophy. German industry in the 1930s and 1940s prided itself on craftsmanship, on producing machines that were sophisticated, durable, and effective. The Panther tank was arguably the best medium tank of the war. The Me-262 jet fighter was years ahead of any Allied aircraft. The Type XXI U-boat represented a revolution in submarine design. And the Sd.Kfz 251 was, by any standard, a superb fighting vehicle. But excellence in design does not translate to excellence in production when resources are finite and time is running out. Each half-track required approximately 3,500 man-hours to build. Each one used specialized components that could not be easily substituted. Each one demanded skilled labor that Germany, fighting a multi-front war and losing men by the hundreds of thousands, could not spare. The factories that produced half-tracks could have produced other things, tanks, aircraft, artillery, but the High Command, locked into a doctrine that prized mechanized infantry, continued to allocate resources to a vehicle that could never be produced in the numbers needed. An American GMC truck, by contrast, required roughly 500 man-hours to build. It used standardized parts that were interchangeable across models. It could be assembled by workers with minimal training, and when it broke down, which it did often, it could be repaired in the field with basic tools. It was not designed to be beautiful or even particularly durable. It was designed to be produced in quantities that defied comprehension and to keep moving until it could not move anymore, at which point there would be another truck behind it. The United States applied the same logic to everything. Jeeps, cargo trucks, amphibious vehicles, tank transporters, all of them built on assembly lines that ran 24 hours a day, staffed by workers who included women, African Americans, and others who had been marginalized in peacetime, but who now formed the industrial army that fed the war machine. The Ford Willow Run plan alone, repurposed from automobile production, built one B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes at its peak. This was not craftsmanship. This was mass production as a weapon of war. February 1943. Stalingrad, Soviet Union. The city is a grave. Buildings that once housed families now stand as hollow shells, their windows like the empty eyes of corpses. The Volga River, frozen and gray, marks the edge of the world that the Wehrmacht has tried and failed to conquer. German soldiers, those who survive, are starving. There's no fuel for vehicles. There's no ammunition for extended fighting. The Sixth Army, once the pride of the German military, is encircled and dying. In the Soviet rear areas, American Studebaker trucks unload crates of ammunition and food. These trucks have come from Murmansk and Arkhangelsk, shipped across the Arctic Ocean in convoys that braved German U-boats and winter storms. They have come from Persia, driven north through Iran on roads built by American engineers. They have come from Vladivostok, carried across Siberia on railroads that never stop moving. Soviet soldiers do not speak English, but they know the word Studer, their nickname for the Studebaker US-6 truck. They know that when the Studer arrives, it means the offensive can continue. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the architect of Soviet victory, would later write, "Without American trucks, we would have lost the war. We could produce tanks and aircraft, but we could not move our armies without vehicles, and we could not produce vehicles in the numbers we needed. The Americans gave us mobility. They gave us the means to sustain offensives across 1,000 kilometers. This was not a small thing. This was everything." The irony is profound. The Soviet Union, the ideological enemy of capitalism, was saved in part by the productive capacity of the most capitalist nation on earth. The Germans, who believed in the superiority of their system, found themselves outmatched not by communist ideology, but by American industrial pragmatism. The half-track, symbol of German mechanized might, became a rarity at the front. The American truck, simple and unglamorous, became ubiquitous. April 1945. The Ruhr Pocket, Germany. The war is ending, though not all of the men who fight it know this yet. German forces, surrounded and cut off, struggle to hold positions that no longer have strategic meaning. In a farmyard outside a village whose name will not be remembered, a young German soldier sits beside an abandoned half-track. He is 19 years old. He joined the Hitlerjugend with dreams of glory, of defending the fatherland, of proving himself worthy of the Reich that promised 1,000 years of greatness. Now he is hungry, and the half-track beside him is a relic. It has no fuel. The radio does not work. The tracks are damaged, and there are no spare parts. American trucks pass on a road beyond the farmyard, dozens of them, then hundreds. They do not stop. They do not need to. The war here is over, even if the formalities remain. The soldier watches them go, and feels something he cannot name. It is not envy, not quite. It is the realization that he was never fighting a war his nation could win. Not because German soldiers lacked courage or skill, but because the mathematics were always against them. 5,000 half-tracks. 300,000 trucks. The numbers are not metaphorical. They are the difference between a military that could sustain offensives and one that could only fight in bursts, burning its resources until nothing remained. They are the difference between a nation that could replace losses and one that could only watch its strength dwindle. They are the difference between a system that valued symbolic excellence and one that valued overwhelming, relentless sufficiency. The symbolism of the truck is easy to overlook. It is not a glamorous weapon. It does not inspire propaganda posters or newsreels. Soldiers do not paint kill marks on trucks or name them with affection, as they do with tanks and aircraft. The truck is background, infrastructure, the unglamorous necessity that makes everything else possible. But in war, as in life, it is often the unglamorous things that determine outcomes. A German panzer grenadier could be the finest infantryman in the world, well-trained, disciplined, experienced. But if his half-track had no fuel, if his ammunition did not arrive, if his rations were delayed, if the wounded could not be evacuated, then his excellence meant nothing. An American soldier might be less experienced, less disciplined, less ideologically committed. But if he had ammunition when he needed, if he had food and water, if he knew that the trucks would keep coming no matter what, then he could fight with a confidence that no amount of training could replicate. The German war economy was built on a philosophy of quality and efficiency. Every resource was to be used optimally. Every weapon was to be the best of its kind. The problem was that war is not efficient. War is waste on an industrial scale. It consumes men and machines faster than any economy can replace them unless that economy is designed from the ground up for mass production. The United States understood this in a way that Germany never did. It understood that 100 adequate trucks were worth more than 10 perfect half-tracks. It understood that speed of production mattered more than elegance of design. The numbers tell the story more clearly than any narrative can. Germany produced approximately 15,000 half-tracks of all types during the entire war. This includes the Sd.Kfz, 250 and Sd.Kfz 251 series, the primary armored personnel carriers of the Wehrmacht. These vehicles were distributed across every front: Russia, North Africa, Italy, France, the Balkans. By 1944, losses had so depleted the half-track force that most German infantry divisions relied on horse-drawn transport or moved on foot. The mechanized divisions, those elite units that had defined blitzkrieg, were shadows of their former strength. The United States, in the same period, produced over 2.5 million trucks. This includes the GMC CCKW, known as the Jimmy, which became the standard cargo vehicle for the U.S. Army. It includes the Dodge WC series, versatile medium trucks used for everything from troop transport to ambulance work. It includes the Studebaker US-6, which became the backbone of Soviet logistics. These vehicles were not exotic. They were not sophisticated. But they were everywhere. When Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, the logistics network that supported them was the largest in military history. Within weeks, trucks were moving thousands of tons of supplies from the beaches to the front lines every day. By the time the Allies crossed the Rhine in March 1945, the supply chain stretched from the Atlantic coast to the heart of Germany, hundreds of miles of roads packed with trucks moving in an unending convoy. The Germans called it the road that never sleeps. They attacked it from the air when they could, bombed bridges, mined roads, ambushed convoys. It did not matter. The trucks kept coming. The experience of captured German soldiers reveals the psychological impact of this disparity. After the Battle of the Bulge, when the last major German offensive in the West had failed, Allied intelligence officers interviewed hundreds of German prisoners. Many of them spoke not of American combat prowess, but of American logistics. One Panzer officer said, "We knew we could win battles. We did win battles. But every time we stopped to regroup, to wait for fuel and ammunition, the Americans moved forward. They did not stop. They did not wait. It was as if they had an infinite supply of everything. How do you fight an enemy who never runs out?" Another prisoner, a sergeant in the Panzer Grenadier Division, described the moment he understood the war was lost. "We were retreating through France. Our half-track broke down, something in the engine I don't remember. We had no spare parts. We abandoned it and walked. On the road, we saw an American truck that had been hit by artillery. It was destroyed, completely unusable. But a kilometer later, there was another truck, and another, and another. They just left the broken ones and kept moving. We could not afford to do that. Every vehicle we lost was a loss we could not replace. I realized then that we were not fighting an army. We were fighting a factory. This was the essence of the American way of war. It was not elegant. It was not designed to inspire songs or legends. It was designed to win through sheer, crushing abundance. The United States did not outfight Germany in every battle. German soldiers, man for man, were often more experienced and tactically proficient. German tanks, weapon for weapon, were often superior. But wars are not won by individual battles or individual weapons. They are won by the side that can sustain its effort longer, replace its losses faster, and deliver the tools of war to the place they are needed when they are needed. The half-track, in the end, became a symbol of German limitations. It was a vehicle designed for a short war, a war of maneuver and decisive victories, a war in which quality and speed would overcome numerical disadvantages. When that war did not materialize, when blitzkrieg failed in the vastness of Russia and the deserts of North Africa, the half-track became a liability. It was too complex to produce in the quantities needed. It was too expensive in resources that Germany no longer had. It was too specialized for an army that increasingly relied on improvisation and desperation. By 1944, the German military was cannibalizing its own vehicles to keep others running. Half-tracks were stripped for parts. Engines were pulled from abandoned vehicles and installed in those that could still move. The mechanized divisions, once the pride of the Wehrmacht, were mechanized in name only. Most of their infantry marched on foot. Most of their supplies were moved by horse-drawn carts, as if the 20th century had never happened. The American truck, by contrast, was designed for the war that actually occurred. It was designed to be built quickly, maintained easily, and replaced without hesitation. It was designed for a war of attrition, a war of production, a war in which the nation with the largest industrial base would grind its enemies into submission. The United States did not have the best army in 1940. It did not have the most experienced soldiers or the most advanced weapons. But it had the capacity to build an army that could not be defeated because it could not be outproduced. The philosophical implications are as profound as the strategic ones. The German war machine was built on a belief in excellence, in the idea that superior skill and superior design could overcome material disadvantages. This was not entirely wrong. Germany achieved extraordinary things with limited resources. But the belief in excellence blinded German leaders to the reality that excellence is not scalable. You cannot train 1 million elite soldiers in a year. You cannot build 100,000 perfect machines in a war economy that is running out of steel and oil. Excellence is a peacetime luxury. War demands sufficiency in overwhelming quantities. The United States understood this, perhaps because its economy was built on mass production and mass consumption. Americans were accustomed to abundance, to the idea that having more of something was better than having the best of something. This was not a military philosophy, it was a cultural assumption. But in war, it became a devastating advantage. The American soldier might not have been as well trained as his German counterpart in 1943, but by 1945, he had more experience, more support, and more confidence because he knew that his nation could deliver whatever he needed. The German soldier, no matter how skilled, fought with the knowledge that his nation was running out of everything. The truck became the symbol of American abundance, just as the half-track became the symbol of German scarcity. In the rubble of Berlin, in the spring of 1945, Soviet soldiers rode American trucks through streets that had once echoed with Nazi parades. In the Pacific, American trucks carried supplies over mountain roads on islands whose names most Americans could not pronounce. In China, in Burma, in Italy, in France, in every theater where the Allies fought, the truck was there, unglamorous, unnoticed, essential. The Germans had built 5,000 half-tracks and believed that engineering brilliance would compensate for numerical inferiority. The Americans had built 300,000 trucks and proved that abundance, not brilliance, wins wars. It is a lesson that empires have learned and forgotten across centuries. Quality matters, but quantity overwhelms. Excellence is valuable, but sufficiency in overwhelming numbers is decisive. Epilogue. The war ended, as all wars do, with victors and vanquished. The half-tracks, those that survived, were collected and scrapped, their metal recycled, their purpose obsolete. The trucks, most of them, were sold off as surplus, and for decades after the war, you could find GMC and Studebaker trucks on farms and construction sites across the world, still running, still working, still doing what they were built to do. There is a photograph from 1946, taken somewhere in the American Midwest. It shows a farmer standing beside a surplus army truck that he bought for $300. The truck is painted green, still bearing faint traces of its military markings. The farmer uses it to haul grain, to move livestock, to do the unglamorous work of feeding a nation that has turned its attention from war to peace. The truck is 20 years old by the time it finally dies, its engine seized, its frame rusted through. It has driven more miles in peace than it ever did in war. This is the quiet victory that no one celebrates. Not the victory of a battle won, or a city captured, but the victory of a system that could produce so much that even its surplus changed the world. The half-track was a marvel of engineering, a weapon crafted with care and precision. But the truck was something more profound. It was the embodiment of a nation that understood that war is not won by heroes alone, but by the unglamorous, relentless machinery of production. 5,000 half-tracks, 300,000 trucks. The numbers are not just statistics. They are the story of how one nation's philosophy of war, rooted in abundance, pragmatism, and the belief that freedom requires not just courage but capacity, overcame another nation's philosophy rooted in excellence, ideology, and the fatal assumption that will alone could overcome material reality. The trucks moved forward and the world moved with them. The half-tracks stopped, and the Reich that built them fell into history. In the end, the war was won not by the best machines, but by the most machines. Not by the finest soldiers, but by the best supplied soldiers. Not by the most brilliant plans, but by the simplest truth, that in a long war, the nation that can produce the most, endure the longest, and deliver what is needed when it is needed will prevail. This is the lesson written in the snow of the Ardennes, in the ruins of Stalingrad, in the roads that stretched from Normandy to the Rhine. This is the lesson that 5,000 half-tracks and 300,000 trucks taught the world. And it is a lesson that endures long after the machines themselves have turned to rust and the men who drove them have passed into memory.